but just to let you know, I'm happy to be here. um, this idea of coming on this platform and sharing. Um, I often thought along the way here the topic of discussion, Bill C-92. Uh, what a topic of uh, discussion! It's almost like watching a little animal penned up and not exactly being able to uh, get the full content of this animal. This thing caged, as I see it, um, shifting and changing. But it's it's very new. But what I'll do is I'll introduce myself. Um, I will greet people in my language. Um, Niwakoma kante ke kwa netutemik. Rod Belanger netsigasom. Nananaskitinoma anuts kitwam kiskawi wapataman. I'm thankful to be here today. My name is Rod Belanger. I'm thankful for this day. I'm greeting all my friends and relatives. Um, I think it's very important piece of discussion today. We've only been given an hour to actually talk about this uh, Bill C-92. What I want to do is explain a little bit more about myself. Um, I am part of the 60 Scoop. My story's a little bit uh, different in that my family was, of course, impacted by this apprehension era, and my family was scattered here and there, and it just so happened I was uh, located closer to the city here and closer to my homelands. My dad had rescued me uh, when I was about 11 and had taken me back to the homelands where I was able to uh, meet relatives, friends, and at that time start my long process of reconnecting to my community. Uh, but that didn't help the fact that I didn't do this with the rest of my family. Um, there's a lot of pros and cons to that, and the pros to that was I was able to connect. I was able to be reintroduced to ceremony, be reintroduced to language, be reintroduced to uh, family, which is very important within the context of being Nehiyaw, uh, uh, a, a Cree descendant from the Treaty 4 territory. In my background right now, I'm working in the education system, and I feel it part of my journey. Education is a huge component in this process of having to deal with all the impacts of colonization and how this has slipped away from the rest of Canada. We've been kind of put on the back burner as far as the education part of our dark relationship with Canada. um, I also am was a part of the 60 Scoop apology process here in the province. I don't. I find the experience was enlightening, but at the end of it, there was no fulfillment of anything. It kind of still left myself standing out in the cold, but then looking at the politics behind what had just taken place, I can see that it was good for Canada, good for the province to record that they've made some sort of attempt to apologize to children apprehended during the 60 Scoop. here in the province. Some of the other work that I was involved with and still like to carry on from from a distance, and at the same time, I'm working my way to get to the United Nations. Where I come from, I'll let you know where I come from. I come from the Ochapowace First Nation, um, located in Treaty 4 territory. The original name of our people is the kâ-têpwêwisîpîwiyiniwak, which is the Calling River people. Um, with that, uh, I guess we'll this this part of the United Nations. I think they were there's a discussion panel within this platform where they'll be talking a little bit about UNDRIP. My involvement with UNDRIP had to do a lot with the original documents, the original process. My band was used as a model to study the treaty arrangements that the Crown had made um, with Treaty 4 territory. And with that, our chief was our our past chief was a great defender of treaty and was a person that practiced sovereignty within our nation. We had an understanding of who we are, and we still have that understanding of who we are within this territory. Under the UNDRIP education part, we were part of the final study, the final report to the United Nations. A dear friend of mine who is and relative who is not who is no longer with us was heavily involved with the process and the structure of of creating this voice and this seat at the United Nations. And he was given the blessing from our people to go out there and gather information and come back and share with our communities because of the impacts of colonization throughout the world with Indigenous people. Um, he had taken me along this journey with him for a number of years, and this idea of being educated under this whole worldview of how colonization has impacted Indigenous people has been a trip. And I still want that to be a part of my life. And I know that my a good friend and relative follows me as I go along this path. And I'm sure he's with me here today. So um, we can go on and on about myself, but we don't want to do that here. But I think I kind of looked at the platform um, uh, of today and realized I kind of thought it was maybe day one was an Indigenous Day, and I looked at all the topics of discussion, and a lot of them are very uh, there's a lot of information there that a lot of people will not be educated in because of the topics of discussion. These areas of concern are so huge. 45 minutes of trying to explain Bill C-92 is almost impossible. Um, with I'm just trying to get comfortable here. Um, with this topic of Bill C-92, I've had a chance to talk with some people across Canada and pull out some information. If I would have knew uh, prior to this that I could have brought a panel on with me, I probably would have brought some backup. But I didn't know, and last minute some of these people would have had to be well informed and well prepared to enter this platform with me. So I'm going to try and do this on my own. I also work in the education system, as I mentioned, and what I do in the classroom is I try, I, I assist in the education system where a lot of Indigenous content um, is is being exposed in the education system. And when we look at the curriculum and the exposure of this information, it's it it's not very it's not very educational, and I find it very outdated. And therefore, I look at the amount and the quality of education that Canada is getting regarding Indigenous people is very low. So I go in to assist, and when I go into the classrooms and speak, I notice that in order for a lot of these students, not just the students but the teachers, um, in order for them to engage in the topic of discussion, there needs to be a little bit of historical uh, rear view of how we got here to this topic of discussion. So I find that with educating people, even on Bill C-92, people have to have a understanding of some of the historical relevance around Bill C-92. With Bill C-92, I have a few notes here. I'm gonna read off of. I don't want to get to where I'm going all over the place here, but kind of want to stay on topic here. Um, so with Bill C-92, I have recognized not just this bill, but many of the bills that have been pushed through Parliament, through Ottawa, and placed into law when it comes down to Indigenous people have been pushed uh, through pretty fast. I have some critical analysis in regards to a lot of these bills that are passed so fast through Parliament and passed into law. And I think of the impacts of the passing of these bills on on Indigenous people. I'm uh, I'm labeling Bill C-92 and other bills as placebo bills. I think with Bill C-92, it's a huge distraction to some of the uh, activities that are going on in regards to Indigenous people and their pushback in some of the territories. I had I'd spoken with um, a lady that does some work with Yellowhead. Um, it's a kind of a think tank group out of Ryerson, and they write some interesting articles. And a lot of these people that I'm engaged with in regards to like what's really happening out there, I'm glad to have these kinds of relationships with them. It's not just the relationship part, but it's the historical part that uh, engages me or unites me or ties me in with a lot of these people across the board. With the instructions, some of the things that some of these people wanted me to um, mention when it comes down to Bill C-92 is the idea that this is just another um, uh, a colonial undertaking when it comes down to dealing with Indigenous people and the issues and a lot of the things that we face now and we've faced in the past and we faced historically in dealing with um, uh, Canada, this dark relationship that we have with them. Um, when I talk about the colonial project, I talk about what has taken place since treaty, and even prior to treaty. Uh, I want to talk a little bit about some of the language that is supporting some of the bills that have been passed through Parliament as of late, and this one being C-92, the word sovereignty. Now, the word uh, sovereignty could get Indigenous people very excited when we're told by the federal government that we're able to practice our sovereignty in a lot of the issues that impact and have affected our people since treaty time. Now we have to have an understanding of this term sovereignty. I will give you an example of us having to challenge law um, at a provincial level, Supreme Court level, and then finally Canada making a decision who's right and who's wrong. Um, our band, I had mentioned our chief and our position within our band within Treaty 4 territory has always practiced sovereignty. And we had a court case some years ago in the area of economic development. Our band had a very lucrative business, being a ski resort and being some of the finest ski hills west before the mountains. And we know as Indigenous people that uh, the conditions that Indigenous people live in on the reserve when it comes down to economics, when it comes down to having to um, distribute wealth where there's none, and having to have opportunities where they're scarce. Our band had found that this economic venture of creating a ski hill and creating a business where it would create revenue for the band, where Canada failed to uphold some of its agreements when it came down to funding certain areas. So we had created a OST, which was we called an Ochapowace sales tax, and we did not report to the province, and the province got after us in reporting, and this turned into a federal case, and we hadn't reported for a number of years, and we had ended up getting charged. And it ended up going to the province, and it ended up in the Supreme Court. And some of the language in the decision that was handed down to my chief and to our band when it came down to talking about our position in being able to be sovereign. In this case, the judge had stated that we had given up our sovereignty um, at this at the time of treaty signing, and that Canada had taken control of um, uh, our sovereignty prior to treaty, and it was no longer we were no longer a sovereign people, but we were under the direction of the crown. And this was disturbing to hear this judgment come down from the Supreme Court upon people that had signed treaty with with the crown. And so this sovereignty issue, when it comes down to Bill C-92, um, we have been given direction by the federal government under C-92 to create our own laws. And the writing of these policies and laws are to help us to uh, be sovereign in our uh, dealings with this child welfare issue and the return of our children to our lands, which is very important. Um, with with this case that um, helped some of us understand the position that our people are in within our territories and within our nations, is perplexing when it comes down to sovereignty. I find I find that Bill C-92 is a uh, continued process of control and manipulation within Indigenous territories uh, across Canada. Um, Looking back a little bit at history as well, um, our relationship with our 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 position as Indigenous people prior to contact is still not being recognized as a position that Indigenous people can um, take into their own power and create self-determination and create self-government, where um, restoration, restitution of things are 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 at our fingertips, where we can um, find ourselves in a place where we can control our own um, destiny as Indian people. Um, I'm gonna try and stay on topic here. I wanna talk a little bit to sovereignty about this, and the treaty area about this. And since this is a human rights forum, I want to talk. And I know that there's another group talking a little bit about UNDRIP, but I can't leave this part out, just for the simple fact that uh, there's an interpretation within the original document, and then there's a process that Canada went through, and they have their own interpretation of this. So in UNDRIP, in Article 3, Indigenous people have the right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they are freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and economic development. And I want to kind of add a little bit of Article 27 into the talk here. Indigenous people have the right to the restitution of lands, territories, and resources which they have traditionally owned and otherwise occupied or used, and which have been confiscated or occupied, used, or damaged without their free, prior, and informed consent. Where this is not possible, they have the right to just and fair compensation, unless otherwise freely agreed upon by the peoples concerned. Compensation shall take the form of lands, territories, resources in equal quality, size, and legal status. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some of the movements that have taken place at uh, just a little bit after treaty. Our treaty here in Treaty 4, 1874, September 15th, 1874. And 2 years later, the Indian Act was rolled out in 1876. It was imposed government control over all Indians and covering many aspects of life. We have to understand that during this time and the creation of the Indian Act was a process of assimilation. It was a temporary set of laws uh, to help to push Indigenous people successfully into and through the assimilation process. That's what the Indian Act was all about. So when we think of this process, the reason why we need to understand a lot of this is because we need to understand that a lot of these laws that have created since these times have done nothing but harm to Indigenous people across the board within their treaty territories. The Indian Act in 1876 created groups of Indians for whom reserve land had been set aside and money was held by the Crown. A band council was comprised of a chief and a certain number of councillors, usually elected by band members. A band council, this is exactly what it would look like in today's vision of what a chief and council were actually being rolled out under the Indian Act. A band council would corresponds to a municipal town or village council and a chief as its mayor. Band councils were used to replace traditional forms of social organization. Many of the first band councils were organized by missionaries who used them to exert control over the communities. The reason why I wanted to mention that is our people have been operating under chief and council system since this was imposed upon our people in Treaty 4 in 1876, which when you think about it, it's not that long ago. What they did, I'm going to try and tie this into some of the activities within what's going on in Bill C-92 today. This actually would be a good workshop for people to find themselves in if they want to get educated and if they want to be part of not just moving on in the way Canada creates such chaos and havoc around creating these bills that Indigenous people are almost have to follow. This would be good ideas of how we can gather ourselves together in the future and create think tanks where we can understand instead of always talking about these problems, we can find solutions. I have a lot of people that I talk to about this, and some of the questions are always, what are solutions? So we need to wrap our head around, first of all, the history and how this has impacted our people. And then the next step would be to create solutions that are going to be viable and are going to be that are going to bring a lot of resurgence to our communities and to our territories. You know, the implementation of the Indian Act took away a lot of the structures that have been there prior to contact. People got to realize that our people had social venue. Our people had political organization. Our people had governance systems. Our people had economics, meaning that they had not just trading in small local venues within their territories, local nations, but a lot of these trade routes are required that they move products of need to other parts on Turtle Island. So we had economics. one of the huge contributors to our economy was the buffalo. And we know that during the time of this treaty process, um, uh, in a lot of history that Canada writes, there was a disappearance of the buffalo. And we have, when I think about this language that they use when they talk about the disappearance of the buffalo, it makes me think of a buffalo going in the bush and not coming out. But that wasn't the case in how we can explain the disappearance of the buffalo. But it was because of the intrusion and because of capitalistic venture and because of if they can dispose of the buffalo, they can control the Indian because it was the Indian person, the Indian nation on Turtle Island, a huge part of their economics centered around the buffalo. So during the rollout of the Indian Act, taking away the ways that we communicate, the ways that we had established law. You know, there's a huge push in Canada because of reconciliation. I don't really care for that word too much, but in the area of missing, murdered, and Indigenous women, for some reason, of course, it's a human rights issue. It's a human issue, but within the Indigenous community, within Nehiyaw ways, within our own natural laws, a lot of the responsibility of our women was was that they carried the laws. They had been the decision makers within our nations. So with them going missing at high numbers, and you know, it's in the media, it's been in the news, but we know in the background there's been a lot of stories that Canada will never hear about when it comes down to the disappearance of our women. Well, we need our women within our systems to take their place. We need this healing process where not just the women but the men need to heal so that women can take on those rightful roles within our nations. We don't need another federal government policy to control and manage Indigenous people. So women played a huge role within our communities, within our nations when it came down to writing laws. These were some of the things that were displaced when it came to the rollout of uh, the Indian Act and the installation of chief and council. Those were never our ways. We never had a a chief, and then all of a sudden we had um, an election process where we elected a chief. All of this process came out of the Indian Act. So these were when we think of that, and Canada thinks of that, and Canadians look at Indigenous people and see Indians wearing war bonnets and councillors at meetings. They don't understand that these are not our ways, and this is not our process. These are not our our hierarchy that was here prior to contact, and these systems that rolled out. These systems that rolled out, nobody will ever understand the impacts that they've had on our people when it comes down to fully understanding the impacts of the colonial project of this device of colonization that we've seen ravish and terrorize and help um, uh, all of this. I'm trying to find the words here. We'll just carry on. But those are some of um, the things that we have to deal with not just personally, but on a day-to-day, when it comes down to looking at what's going on within our chief and council systems, when it comes down to one of the most important things to Indigenous people, and that's our children. The rollout of the Indian Act, the colonized structure of education, and the idea that Canada had taken it upon themselves and created the residential school system, where it had literally started to tear apart our families, where our people camped around the outside of the residential schools so that they could be close to these children, so that they could have a glimpse of their children. I can't imagine um, uh, how that must have felt for Indigenous people, because prior to that, we've never literally had to go through this sort of the beginning of trauma for Indigenous people. So those that system from the very beginning has been a very complex sort of creation of laws and acts that literally crippled Indigenous people within their within their own paradigms, within their own existence. On a day to day, they were uh, experiencing this rapid decline of their existence, and what it was because of the Indian Act, and because of the rollout of this system across our territories. So we got to realize that something about this. In 1755, the Indian Department was formed and was part of the British military in North America, and many of its members were military officers. So just the background of how coordination and how they roll out these programs from the very beginning was from a military sense of view in how we need to keep uh, people under control. So the strategy of the government um, was to remove the strategy of the government right now is to remove the Indian Act and all special legal status of Indigenous people and reserve lands. This has always been its long-term, um, and it would mean the legal and political and economic assimilation of Indian people. In 1969, Canada had introduced through their government the white paper. We won't get all into that, but these are some of the movements that continue to roll out as Canada continued to create laws that would be detrimental to our existence as Indian people. Um, this was a lot of these during this era in the 70s. There was a pushback on the white paper, and it's historical by these groups, the National Indian Brotherhood. These were at one time these groups were just lobby groups. They were created from the sweat of Indigenous people that were concerned with the way that the federal government wasn't obligating to treaty, and having to continue to face the pressures of what was happening with the land. We'll talk a little bit about some of the movement of that, but I want to kind of continue on like how this movement of the Indian Act, how it literally like pulled Indigenous people into the process, and whitewashed them to a place where today some of the people that are responsible for creating these laws are our very own people. I'm not really following how much time I have left, but according to here, I have 18 minutes left. I'm not even getting to Bill C-92. But, okay, so I want to talk a little bit about, I want to push through some of my material here. So this isn't that far either. But in the 1960s, that wasn't that long ago either. The Indian agents within the Indian Act, within our territories, was starting to be phased out. And they were starting to be replaced by the chief and counselors that were trained by the Department of Indian Affairs to implement government programs and to administer the band councils. So in the 70s, there was a huge push for Indians to attend colleges and universities. By the 1980s, as many as 30,000 Indians may have gone to university to study economics, political science, law, skills which became valuable as they returned to their reserves and began their careers in the Indian Act system. In collaboration with that, many chiefs and counselors enjoy lives of material wealth and luxury. Their collaboration involves enabling corporations to better exploit natural resources and maintain a system of oppression over Indian people. This is all about maintaining power. And one of the industries that they don't talk about is the industry of child welfare. One of the people that I had talked to on the phone that had did a paper with the Yellowhead had talked to me about how this can be corrected without having to push Indigenous people back into being controlled by bills such as Bill C-92. I want to get through a little bit more of this. So the assimilation process. The assimilation process is the merging of one entity or group into another. In North America, this has involved the destruction of traditional Indian culture and social organization and their replacement of European forms. In order to accomplish this, Indian people first had to be weakened through biological warfare and military violence. After this, they were forced onto reservations where they were subjected to policies of assimilation, more imposed legislation, and colonial laws. These policies included Christianization and residential schools run by the churches until the 1970s. Generations of Indian children and youth were forced into residential school where they were forbidden to practice their culture and were indoctrinated with European values and ways of life. So today, the assimilation still continues through the education system, as well as the corporate media and entertainment industries. Through these, our views and beliefs and values are shaped by the system. The success of assimilation can be measured in how much a person accepts these values and beliefs as their own, which is reflected in their way of life. Today, many are assimilated to just getting jobs, having money, and material items. And these are supposed to be positive life goals. The reason why I went over some of the notes that I have here in regards to where we are, I was directed by some of the people that are in these arenas to talk about uh, this place of sovereignty that Indigenous people aren't experiencing. Through this process of Bill C-92, federal government is putting the onus on bands to create their own laws and policies and structure and framework to to uh, to a place of utopia where we envision our children coming back to our homelands in droves. But the reality of that is chaotic. It is not going to it. It's going to fail. It. I shouldn't use that word failure. Within, I talked to some frontline workers that are Indigenous people in the province here. I had asked if they would come and share with my community because we are planning to do this as well. And some of the chaos because of the rollout of Bill C-92 and this provincial child welfare laws and policies conflicting with um, the rollout of our laws and policies. Our band, Ochapowace, is planning to do our own laws and our own policies in regards to Bill C-92. Some of the frontline workers uh, are finding uh, we don't really hear all of these discussions around the chaos that is actually going on out there with the release of Bill C-92 and us already under this 10-year um, uh, this 10-year agreement where a lot of money is being released into our communities to establish a framework, to establish laws and policies to actually deal with uh, children in care. Some of the huge problems around Bill C-92 is the urban impacts. We have a lot of Indigenous children in care that are in the urban systems. Our people, we have a huge community of our people that have been moved over into the urban centers, and then we have our reserve people that are also dealing with this child welfare issue, and there's a lot of conflict there. Some of the reasons why there is a lot of conflict there is because of some of the practices that we're not following as Indigenous people. There's a huge resurgence of things that are important to Indigenous people. At the beginning of this talk, I wanted to kind of educate around what was taken from Indigenous people. And these things that were taken from Indigenous people, if they're given back into the hands of Indigenous people and allowed to use them, we would be better off and in a better position to be able to uh, take control and to help guide our children back into our communities, to help the families that are associated with these children to better heal. For example, the other day, my chief and uh, council and a couple of the other, that's a huge story there too, but we were able to go to the archives, and we were able to get them to to take that what was in their position and bring for us to see. And what they had brought out was our chief's pipe. Our chief was instrumental in treaty here, in Treaty 4 territory, Chief Kakishiwil. Anyways, they have in possession of them his pipe. Now, when we think about that, we think in a natural sense, there's a pipe and a pipe stem. But within our teachings, those, those, those pipes within our nations and those people that had responsibilities in carrying those items had a lot of influence and impacted our communities greatly because we understood our relationship to that pipe. We understood the teachings and the meanings of what that pipe meant when it was lifted. Those things are missing from our communities. They're in possession of somebody else. But when I looked at this pipe and I thought this pipe wasn't smoked for a long time, but the power and the idea and the relationship, how this pipe was created and how it impacted our people prior to contact, those powers were still there. When we go to ceremony today, we still get direction in how we should continue to push back on Canada when it comes down to being able to practice self-governance, self-determination. When we look at Bill C-92 today and we see the confusion and the conflict across the board, all of these groups that are doing these creating these laws in coordination with the federal government. I've looked at some of them. I've studied policy. I've been in positions of writing policy where everything looks good. I saw one that was written in Alberta. It was all written in Cree, and all the laws were explained within our language. And some of those words that they were using were explained as part of our historical government pieces. But when it comes down to creating those laws, are we going to be able to use those laws as our own? Or are we going to be in a position of disillusioned sovereignty once again? We got to realize too that if they decided to give this back to Indigenous people, they would be giving back an industry that's worth billions of dollars within the framework of Canada. If you take child welfare out of the picture, expect like Indigenous child welfare, parts of the economy will be greatly impacted because of the taking back of control of our children. Canada can't let that go. To create Bill C-92 and to create this idea that Indigenous people are now practicing sovereignty with the release and with the release and drawing up of its own laws and policies for Canada to follow is very distracting. It's not based in reality. Anything that Canada has ever created was based upon its own idea of sovereignty within a land that Canada uh, claims to have ownership of. And in order to complete this assimilation project, if Canada can take continued control of our children, if Canada can get away with continuing to push policy and law on Indigenous people and not allow us to create what was taken from us, um, we're not going to see great. We're not going to see any kind of futuristic success for Indigenous people. Some of the most influential people behind these bills are our own. AFN, FSIN. They do not represent Indigenous people at the grassroots. We do not vote for these people that are put in power and have been groomed under the Indian Act, and in collaboration with the federal government become partners with the federal government and create bills, and at the same time return favors, get in return favors. A lot of these people that create these bills are people that are moving up in the Canadian political systems. Still, in Canada's view, Canada still has a problem, and that's the Indian. One of the worst things you could do is take a child from their parent, the way that Canada has taken Indian children from their parents. We know in the animal world, we watch animals, the way that animals react when their cubs are in danger. That can be respected, but when it comes down to Indigenous people and the removal of children, for some reason that's okay. I'm not in favor of Bill C-92. I think it's continued control and manipulation by the federal government. I can't see, even in our own territory, some of the challenges that we have with our own people that are groomed in the system to follow provincial child welfare laws in child apprehension. Some of the CFS organizations that think they have the power to come onto reserves and mandates to apprehend children. It's chaotic out there. To read some of the writing in regards to Bill C-92, for the ordinary Canadian, for the person that has been groomed into the system and wants just to move on and create a livelihood within the society of Canada, they find these things all right to abide by. But as far as Indigenous people go, people at the grassroots, we want things restored to their original context within Indigenous nations. We are not groups of people. We are Indigenous nations. The Crown signed treaties with nations in order to access land. We are not going to have a future if we are going to continue on this road of the colonial project. And we are not going to have children if we continue to follow these bills that are written by a government that has no interest in seeing Indigenous paradigms resurrected. They don't support that. But I do know what they do support: the continuation and exploitation of Indigenous children within an industry, and the seizure of Indigenous lands. There's a lot more politics behind Bill C-92. There's a whole Canada's not giving up on the idea that they still want to confiscate lands that are still written as parcels of land to Indigenous people under treaty. So I mean, I don't know if we even got at any of the content that I have in front of me here when it comes down to everything that's negative around Bill C-92. I know people that oppose Bill C-92, such as myself, and would like to see a resurrection of Indigenous perspective uh, within Indigenous peoples. We're not the most favored people to talk to, but a lot of grassroots people, a lot of very intelligent people, a lot of educated people, a lot of academics, a lot of people that are in law, they know, but nobody's listening. So I'm thankful to have this little bit of time, this little bit of platform. It might have been a little bit chaotic in the rollout of what I was trying to discuss, but I hope we get a little bit of a snapshot, a little bit of a picture of a people that are still existing within our territories, that are concerned about child welfare and the rollout of some of these bills and how fast they've been rolled out. I know Cindy Blackstock has created this platform where she has done exorbitant amounts of work in child welfare, and hats off to her. But there's a lot of people across Canada that this is impacting, and we're not being listened to. So with that, I'd like to just probably leave it at that. I think I've said enough. Yeah.
That was really great, Rod. I wonder, there's one question in chat. Do you mind if I pose it to you really
Sure.
quick? It says, so government claimed that this legislation was co-developed with Indigenous provincial and territorial partners with the goal of keeping Indigenous children and youth connected to their families, communities, and cultures. Do you think there was enough involvement or engagement of Indigenous organizations or groups to form this act? You kind of answered that, but yeah.
I I would like to say yes, but on the other end of that, no. A lot of this, it's the same way with it's the same with I'll use this example. Uh, all of a sudden we were at the legislative building in Regina, and we were reading. We were there to witness uh, Saskatchewan creating the Sask First Act. Indigenous people were not invited to this table to discuss Sask First Act because it had to do with Canada implementing Saskatchewan implementing jurisdiction over lands, and it's the same way with our children. We have a lot of people that could have contributed to this discussion, but our children are I feel that our children are being used as pawns for further
Mhm.
parts of industry where Indigenous people are going to benefit from this as well. I think if we were concerned, if Canada was concerned about um, uh, hearing, they don't have enough time to gather themselves around a table and take specific areas of Canada and see how the people feel about um, uh, this this idea of Bill C-92. Another example. There's a band here not too far, and we're seeing a lot of this happen as well. This activity where the bands all of a sudden receive money to help coordinate this process of diving into Bill C-92 and becoming a part of this. What this has been doing in some of the communities is this is becoming very overwhelming because
Yeah.
they do not have infrastructure. They do not have uh, people that are educated um, in this idea of being able to manage these areas of or being able to control uh, these concern areas where laws are being created and positions are being created. Uh, these bands are literally like throwing their hands up in the air and signing this authority over to the province to take control of, because it's been chaotic
Yeah.
within communities. And bands not too far from here, because I'm in contact with people, we're starting to see some of the frustration, some of the and we kind of think that that we kind of think that this was planned to fail for some bands, but for some of the other bands, it was designed to succeed, because a lot of these bands have signed First Nations Lands Management Act agreements, and they are beginning to see that the beginning of First Nation Lands Management Act agreements is the beginning of the end. The changeover to municipality status, the doing away of reserve lands, and Indigenous people being able to partake in services. So when this process comes to fruition, this process of child welfare will just be part of the system that's part of fourth government, as Canada is rolling out with a lot of these bans. So some bans it's working for. You could put language on the front door. You could put language within your policies and your laws that you're creating, but that doesn't mean that we're free from Canada's control and manipulation through bills such as C-92.
Thank you, Rod. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, I guess we can let folks go and join other sessions if they're up for it. But I think that was really a good critical perspective on how to think about things. And as Emily says, yeah, very powerful message, an important message about just the continued erosion of things. So thank you so much, Rod. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Am I going to talk to you for a couple of minutes before you go?
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. There's the other couple sessions have just begun. I know they're a bit slow getting the tech going, so you'll be fine to kind of jump in and see places along the way.
It was this thing kept me up a few nights, and I wondered I don't know how I got into the topic of having to cover Bill C-92, but
our conversations at the dinner table.
yeah, maybe we'll get Rod to do it, but it was quite excruciating. But I do have a lot of people that I talk to, and lots of grassroots support, and what I mean by that is that these are people that you never hear from. These are people that have strong connections to exactly what's going on out there in the politics around Indian things, I guess you could call them. There's like this cows and plows thing. People don't realize how much these are impacting our treaties. All these distractions with Bill C-92, this UNDRIP, this bill that Canada had passed into law. They called it UNDA. They threw UNDRIP under the bus, is what I think, because their interpretation of UNDRIP isn't even close to what was written in regards to a framework in where Indigenous people can start to feel like these countries will sit up and listen to some of the things that are going on with colonization and how it impacted Indigenous people. Well, Canada took all that out when they domesticated UNDRIP. And it's to fit under the Constitution of Canada, and it's also being pulled by reconciliation. Reconciliation's another vice of the federal government that's damning. It's just another process of recolonization. Is what it is.
A process of getting ahead, control, and appropriation.
Yes, and so the children, I mean, while you should see some of the stuff that I see working in the public school system, and some of the things I've had to address, and some of the meetings that the public school board has called me to in some of their strategic planning, and some of the things that I've had to resort to telling them when it comes down to educating our children. Our children are targets.
Yeah.
Not just within a child welfare system, but within the education system as well. The continuing whitewash of Indigenous children within the system is crazy. It's nuts. But anyways, I thank you for allowing me to share on this platform.
It was really
now,
good to see you.
Now I can relax. I'm not even kidding. You don't know what this has done to me this past
Oh,
three,
Raj. Sorry.
three or 4 days.
Oh my gosh. Well, we'll
just
get to
trying
see you.
I wanted to deliver content that I want to draw a picture, and I hope it was okay.
Yeah.
I want to draw a picture of the reality, a little bit of the reality of things that Indigenous people on the ground at the grassroots level have to deal with every day, not just from Canada, but from our own.
Yeah.
Just because we're Indigenous people doesn't mean we're on the same page. There's a lot of chiefs and a lot of counselors and a lot of people around my territory that I've worked with at the tribal council level, that I was in line with to be in positions of Indian Act leadership, where I left all that.
Yeah.
And these people have become distant from me, especially speaking at forums. Treaty 4 forum, I've spoke there, and the eyebrows raise and all this kind of stuff. They kind of know where I'm coming from. It doesn't help me get employment in my area because of the way that I talk. So we're kind of ostracized. We do what we can to survive, and we're doing okay. But it's we've inherited this.
Yeah.
My family has been involved in this struggle since treaty, and my family has been at the forefront of Canadian politics pushing back on Indigenous people. And for some reason, through these lines of ancestry, of all people to pick this up is myself.
You're the right person.
I take this to ceremony. I take this everywhere I go. So